This film, made in 1903, recalls the first flight of this primitive biplane making aviation history.
A mere 9 weeks before the Wright brothers successfully achieved flight, the nation's supreme publication, the New York Times, predicted it could take 10 million years for man to fly. In the 1960s and 70s, the paper published articles drawing concern about an impending ice age. And in 1995, New York Times Magazine quoted Nobel Prize-winning economist Paul Krugman famously predicting that by 2005 or so, it will become clear that the internet's impact on the economy has been no greater than the fax machines. At least in Krugman's case, he's been able to admit when he's wrong. The New York Times and other major publications have a track record of rejecting the promise of new and disruptive technologies, so it shouldn't come as a huge surprise that the Times got it wrong, at least for now, about Bitcoin, a civilization-changing technology on par with discovering electricity and inventing the internet.
Being an enemy of a technology is a fairly dumb way to waste your time because you're not in charge of whether a technology is adopted at any meaningful scale.
Bitcoin devours energy and others pay a price, declared the New York Times on April 11, 2023. It's a dramatic headline and piece that takes aim at the amount of energy consumed by Bitcoin mining.
I knew that they'd been working on this article for a while, so it did not come as a surprise at all.
Pierre Rochard is vice president of research at Riot Platforms, which operates large-scale mining facilities in Texas, and was one of several miners blasted in the article. The Times claims Bitcoin miners put excessive pressure on power grids, create immense pollution, avoid taxes, and cause higher electricity bills for everyone around. But Rochard and other critics of the piece say the reporter's data and methodology is severely flawed, misleading, and at times outright false. Even more concerning is the paper clearly lacks an understanding of why Bitcoin's energy use is so critical.
The only reason Bitcoin is decentralized is because of the electricity consumption it has. All of the other systems, they sacrifice decentralization in order to avoid this energy consumption. In a way, attacking Bitcoin's energy consumption is a way of attacking its decentralization and trying to bring this whole monetary network under the jackboot of folks who want to control other people's lives.
Bitcoin introduces a cost to creating money, a cost in the form of energy. It levels the playing field and prevents the corruption of currency and the monopolization of power that comes with being able to print money out of thin air the way central banks do.
By introducing the units onto the ledger in a way that is costly through proof of work, you remove the possibility of monopoly profits from the issuance of the currency. And that's called seigniorage.
I love the New York Times. I'm a New Yorker, but that was the most irresponsible piece of journalism I've ever seen.
As CEO of the carbon-neutral Bitcoin mining company Sphere 3D, Patricia Trompeter is committed to helping the public better understand the industry as a whole, how it consumes energy, and Bitcoin mining's benefit to local communities and economies.
I think there's really two big misconceptions with mining. One is we're sucking all the power from the grid, and number two is that we are contributing to carbon emissions. So let's take those one by one. The electricity, it's the only industry that can return power back to the grid within 10 minutes.
Load balancing stabilizes the supply and demand of electricity on a grid. Since unused electricity can't be stored, it essentially goes into the ground, wasted when supply exceeds demand. On the flip side, when there's a surge of demand putting pressure on supply, few industries can respond quickly by shutting off their use of power. Bitcoin mining is one of the only electricity consumers that can respond at a moment's notice to reduce demand and keep the grid balanced and more resilient. This has been helping make renewable energy facilities like wind and solar economically viable.
The second thing is carbon emissions. So you say, oh my gosh, you're returning all these carbon emissions to the environment. Well, you're really not. So electricity is 25% contributor to carbon emissions. The biggest contributor is transportation, that's 27%. And of that 27%, 9% is aviation. So if you literally shut down LaGuardia, JFK, Atlanta, and Chicago for 3 to 5 days, it's the same amount of emissions that you get from all electricity in the grid.
The amount of emissions tied to electricity is often misrepresented and poorly contextualized in mainstream media. Bitcoin mining itself, as Rochard pointed out in his viral satirical video responding to the New York Times article, is just as emissionless as electric vehicles.
I think the science is conclusive. The data shows Bitcoin mining does not emit any CO2.
Even the most unlikely of sources, the World Economic Forum, is actually recognizing the value of Bitcoin mining in areas like reducing methane emissions. Bitcoin miners can capture stranded sources of natural gas that normally get flared or vented into the atmosphere and use it to generate electricity to mine Bitcoin. Less methane gets released, which, by the way, is more potent than CO2.
If we want to literally just scan the horizon for low-hanging fruit, like what can we do right now? Putting Bitcoin miners on every methane emission spot, whether that's an oil and gas well or an agricultural farm or a landfill. These are the main sources of methane worldwide. Bitcoin mines can be anywhere. They're not like hospitals or data centers that have to be in specific locations. And so Bitcoin mining actually makes economical the mitigation of methane emissions by literally printing money from waste methane. And so if you're a serious environmentalist, this seems like a no-brainer. If you're not behind this, then I actually don't take seriously your commitment to climate.
Some Bitcoiners have added to that sentiment, spreading the Stop the Presses campaign, a tongue-in-cheek viral video whose fundamental premise is now gaining traction. The newspaper still prints, well, newspapers. And as we all know, paper comes from trees that are cut down and processed using fossil fuels. The video even caught the eye of Elon Musk, who weighed in on Twitter. Printing over 100 million newspapers per day is a waste of natural resources.
The trees cannot speak for themselves, so we will speak for the trees. We call on the New York Times to end their wasteful ways and to stop the presses. Let's change the news, not the planet.
Let's change the news and the money while we're at it. Bitcoiners are working to educate the world about not only mining, but the fundamental importance of energy. Energy use is directly correlated with human flourishing, and we need more energy, not less, to create an abundant future. Narratives that suggest otherwise do society a great disservice.
I think they're missing the fundamental connection between energy and civilization. There's a lot of ideological presumption and just bad faith. The New York Times article on Bitcoin mining was a case in point in this. Methodologies for different situations, whichever one made Bitcoin look worse was the one they used. Doctoring photos to make it look like, Bitcoin mines were producing all of this pollution. I mean, it's propaganda, straightforwardly so. And it's propaganda by people who don't want to learn.
That type of propaganda raises concerns that centralized powers, whether they be governments, national media, political and corporate elites, are essentially reaching into markets to choose winners and losers, deciding what constitutes as a good use of energy versus bad.
I think about streaming internet porn as the base case. Like, defend the use of that. It's using energy, it uses a lot of energy. I think that having permissionless hard money with a fixed supply that protects anyone against debasement of their currency worldwide, allows anyone access to a payment system. Fundamentally, this is transforming human existence, the ability to send value from peer to peer, from anyone to anyone else, in the way that the internet allowed us to send information from anyone to anyone. It's a fundamental transformational technology. So of course I think it's valuable. If you don't buy into it. Markets decide what's a socially valuable use. I do not want a central planning committee to say what is and isn't valuable.
The foundational premise of the Enlightenment era political revolutions, of which the American project is one, is that power is not to be trusted. Period. End of sentence.